Hey, what's up guys? In today's video we're going to be checking out the certified riot that is the RAAW Jibb. Their shortest travel bike in their lineup, but one that is definitely not afraid to party. Stay tuned to learn all the details and find out how it's been performing in this review on loamwolf.com. Let's go. So while I would have loved to keep the RAAW Jibb in my testing lineup for many months, unfortunately it's having to go back to RAAW just now, but in the couple of months that I've had it and built up, I've certainly taken every opportunity that I can to get this thing out onto the trails, because really I absolutely love what RAAW is doing and the kind of feeling that they instill in their bikes and what they just kind of conjure up to make you go and do when you're riding them. They feel super stiff and stout and just reassuring that they're built to take an absolute pummeling. The suspension performance is excellent, and yeah, just generally the build kit that I've put together on this is a combination of parts that I absolutely stand by, with a couple of test components thrown in there that have proved to be very, very good as well. Yeah, this thing has been an absolute treat to ride, and I'm going to lead out on saying that this is a very positive test overall. The Jibb is RAAW's take on a shorter travel bike with 135mm travel out back paired with 150mm fork as standard, but in the sort of trail, all mountain, light enduro realm, RAAW's definitely pushing it towards that sort of light enduro end of the spectrum. It's a very much a burly built bike, using much of the same tube set as their Madonna enduro bike, and certainly packing a lot of a punch with some huge pivot bearings on there and a real focus on longevity, durability and overall shreddability really. Taking the 135mm travel rear end, they've tweaked the kinematics a little bit to just make it slightly better suited to the slightly less aggressive riding that this bike is intended to see compared to the Madonna, but it's still got around 15% progression, still plenty of anti-squat in the platform to provide good pedaling characteristics, and then very low anti-rise, as is found on their Madonna as well, which keeps the rear end really free under braking, meaning that you get to use all that 135mm travel whether you're on the brakes or not, but at the expense of a little bit of geometry preservation, especially notable in steep terrain where you're going to have to kind of fight the bike and sit a little bit further back. But absolutely possible to do so, and definitely not a character trait that I have found to be particularly negative in my eyes. To briefly cover on the geometry, the Jibb is definitely given more trail-friendly, slightly more agile geometry than the Madonna. You still get fairly reasonable reach numbers, 470mm in a size large. The head angle goes down to 65.5 degrees, just for a little bit of a quicker steering response. Chainstay lengths are a little bit shorter, but still retain their size-specific nature, so they grow by 5mm as you go through the size range, in the bigger sizes at least, just to maintain the weight balance between the wheels a little bit better and make it easier for taller riders to ride the bike and maintain that kind of weight distribution. RAAW also offers a plus or minus 5mm adjustment in that chainstay length with aftermarket kind of flip chips, so you're able to tailor that geometry preference to your liking. Other numbers are a 35mm bottom bracket drop, which is pretty nice and low, but retains a slightly higher dynamic ride height than the Madonna, just for a slightly more agile nature overall. And the seat tube angle is plenty steep to keep you nicely centered in between the wheels, but not ridiculous like we begin to see on some bikes. In terms of build options, there's no complete bikes available directly from RAAW, but you're able to buy either a frame and shock, or a rolling chassis kit to kind of get you started on building the bike to your specifications. RAAW offers coil and air shocks from Fox and Öhlins and maybe more to really let you choose exactly your preference of the suspension, from all the way from a Float X like I've got here through a Float X2 and then even a DHX2 in the Fox range for example, and they kind of back the performance of it with an air shock or a coil shock, really letting you kind of tailor the preference of the ride feel. I personally preferred this with the Float X just to give it a bit more of a lively nature. After all, you're not trying to make this an enduro bike, or at least in my eyes it is it's set up to be a little bit better, well-rounded, and yeah, it's definitely made for a very enjoyable experience overall. Frame and shock combinations start from around about £2,000, RRP at least, and then you can get rolling chassis kits for slightly more than that, with fairly reasonable kind of increases to get the extra components in the package. But currently, I guess it's no surprise, no secret, sorry, that the RAAW Jibb is going to be succeeded fairly soon by a updated version that will carry many of the same changes that the recent Madonna V3 received when it was updated. So currently you'll be able to find this with significant discounts across the RAAW store, and certainly this is still a very relevant bike, I would say, so that shouldn't put you off buying one, and it might just be a great opportunity to get a sweet deal on one. The build kit that I put together on this is a mixture of components I've got on test and stuff that I've had lying around, and so it's very much on the more enduro side of things. You know, most of these components I've selected to run because they are just no nonsense, and I don't have to worry about breaking a wheel or, you know, running out of braking power or slashing a tire. But because of that, the overall bike weight has been quite heavy as a result, coming in at 16.5 kilos, 36.5 pounds or so. So certainly not a lightweight build. And also the frames run around about 4 kilos without a shock. So certainly not a lightweight frame either, but RAAW's certainly putting the focus on durability, and as such, you know, big pivot bearings, nice chunky tubing, all adds to the weight overall. But I don't think that should put you off if you're in the slightly more aggressive ride camps, because the performance it results is certainly worth that weight penalty, I would say. Anyway, enough of the details on this bike. Let's talk about the ride impressions and how it's performed around the local trails here in the Tweed Valley in Scotland. Climbing the Jibb is definitely a pleasurable experience. What it will not do is keep up with some of the other 135mm or so bikes on the market, especially lighter weight carbon fiber bikes that are built up with a lighter build kit than I've got here. But if you were sensible, you could easily knock off a few pounds of that weight, and without, you know, necessarily detrimenting the descending performance too much, and that would of course yield a much nicer and more kind of efficient and lightweight feeling bike to pedal. The kinematic is solid on this bike, the seating position is really good, so it's not the overall frame design that's really holding it back. Of course the frame weight is something to factor in. It is definitely on the heavier side of things for a bike in this category, if not one of the heavier bikes on the market right now. But like I say, to certain riders, that drawback in the pedal efficiency and the overall, just energy of going up the hill may not be worthwhile. But for riders like myself who like to push hard and really want to just have a bike that is no nonsense and nice and durable, the Jibb's extra weight is something that you quickly forget about as soon as you drop into the descents. Speaking of the descents, this bike is an absolute riot. It definitely has moments of that light enduro feeling. It's not a full-on enduro bike. You can't just kind of sit there and plow your way through the roughest terrain or necessarily hold the kind of gnarliest lines as easily as you could on the Madonna, for example. But it does a pretty damn good job for its 135mm rear end. It's a very nicely sorted kinematic that they've got there. It stays nice and supple off the top, but has enough progression to let you really charge hard without too many issues. It's not super progressive. I'd actually like to see it slightly more progressive, and I'm hoping that RAAW's going to do that for the next generation. If it were me, just so you don't have to pack the shock full of volume spacers, and also, of course, to make it play a little bit nicer with a coil shock. But certainly the 15% or so progression that this has is adequate for the general intentions of the bike, and it really hasn't held me back from pushing this thing hard, absolutely sending it to flat, and having a riotous time. That does lead me to one problem that I had on this bike during the end of the testing, when I was on a photo shoot and really trying to capture that energy of just going full send and having a riotous time, and that was a broken lower shock bolt. It's not something that I've heard any problems with from other users, but certainly it was a failure that I encountered. Having a look at the hardware, it's not the burliest lower shock bolt by any means, so Potentially that is an issue that really heavy, really sendy, kind of careless riders are going to experience, but I was being very careless, I must say. I was trying to absolutely send this cheese wedge booter with very minimal landing for a rad photo. It didn't really come out that good, but yeah, certainly it was a harsh bottom out, and I was maybe a little bit surprised to have broken it, but it definitely wasn't a serious issue with the bike, and it held up to all of the abuse beforehand without any issues. The descending performance overall is fairly middle of the road in terms of the geometry. It's not super stable and slacked out, and it avoids being a slouch for the mellower terrain. You get enough of a platform. It's not a super lively and kind of, yeah, it's not a bike that you're going to be able to push and work the terrain quite as well as the best of them in terms of gaining speed, but it does have a slightly plusher, softer edge to it than your conventional 135mm travel bike, which keeps you a little bit more comfortable and a little bit safer, kind of pushing hard. So I think really capturing that light enduro spirit is being done excellently by RAAW, and I think a lot of riders, especially in a slightly more aggressive camp, who want a little bit more agility and trail feedback from their bike, are really going to enjoy this thing. In terms of overall frame quality, RAAW does a killer job with their bikes. I love the huge bearings, the well-sorted cable routing, and yeah, just generally the details are really well covered. And I think for the money, this thing is an absolute, yeah, not necessarily a bargain, but it's good value, and it really feels like a bike that's going to stand up to the test of time, albeit maybe with a spare lower shock mount needed if you're a rider like myself. Overall, the RAAW Jibb has been a bike that I've really loved testing, as I mentioned earlier, and a bike that I think a lot of riders are going to enjoy, but it's definitely going to be a bike that suits the slightly more aggressive rider rather than the kind of, yeah, just somebody who's wanting to cover mellow miles, as you may expect from their kind of heritage of downhill bikes, gnarly, burly enduro bikes. Yeah, they're a company about really pushing the limits and getting rad, and that's exactly what the Jibb lets you do for the bike in its class. I hope you guys have enjoyed checking out this video on the RAAW Jibb. Give us a like if you have, leave us a comment, let us know what you think of this bike and if it's one that you're considering, or are you going to hold out and wait for the Jibb V2 and see what updates they bring to the table there. I'm not sure. I'd certainly welcome one of these into my garage, but you know, maybe having the latest and greatest bike could be worthwhile as well. Who knows? And subscribe to the channel to see more awesome content on awesome riotous bikes like the RAAW Jibb. Thanks for watching. Catch you out on the trails.